Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain. I hope you had a good...
Captain Stefan Rasmussen has been in love with flying all of his life.
I got my first idea of flying when I was a young boy.
After learning to fly in the Air Force, Rasmussen joined Scandinavian Airlines.
He seemed to be the one who really enjoyed his job.
On December the 27th, 1991, he's in command of a state-of-the-art DC-9. The flight will take him to the very edge of his abilities, as his engines fail and his plane falls out of the sky.
I was in a nightmare.
Stockholm, Scandinavian 751, we are crashing into the ground now.
What caused the most baffling accident in Sweden's history is nothing investigators could have imagined. What they finally uncover will strain Rasmussen's lifelong relationship with airplanes to the breaking point.
I really felt that I didn't trust the aircraft.
Mayday, Mayday.
It's 2 days after Christmas. Stockholm Arlanda Airport is a mess of snow, slush, and ice. Passengers boarding a mid-morning Scandinavian Airlines flight to Copenhagen are finding the cabin very uncomfortable.
It was really warm inside the plane when we entered because there had been heaters on during night. And I saw when the passengers embarked, they also wanted to take off jackets and shoes, and because it was like a sauna.
Is it possible to turn the heat down now?
"34-year-old Ulf Sedermark has been with the airline for 4 years. He's the first officer on today's flight.
It was a light snowfall. Temperature was just below freezing and light winds. We were going to fly Stockholm to Copenhagen and then to Warsaw, back to Copenhagen and down to Barcelona that day. It would be quite a long working day.
Stefan Rasmussen has just finished an exterior check of the plane. The Danish pilot is in command this morning.
In those over 12, almost 13,000 hours I've been sitting in an aircraft, I always felt that I put the aircraft and back on like a rucksack. And when we took lift on the wings, we melted together.
The plane Rasmussen is strapping on today is a nearly new DC-9, easily identifiable by its 2 rear engines.
By now, everyone should know that door stays open.
Great.
Even in the days before terrorist threats, flying with the cockpit door open is unusual. It's just one way Rasmussen has endeared himself to the crews and passengers he flies with.
I always had my cabin door open because I found out that if we had the door open and they could see that there were a human being in there, they'd trust you.
For me, it felt good that the door was open. It just feels like you have a connection more than if the door is closed.
The winter weather has delayed this flight, but Rasmussen won't compromise safety for schedule.
Where are we now with the de-icing?
The wings aren't quite done. They've done the underside. Now they're doing the top.
Thank you.
Under Captain Rasmussen's instructions, the ground crew had already de-iced the plane once. Now they're giving it another pass.
And it took a while, but they had trouble getting rid of the snow on top of the wing. So we were slightly late for our pushback out to our runway.
For Captain Per Holmberg, this kind of delay is routine business. He flies DC-9s for the airline. A passenger this morning, he is scheduled to command another flight later that day.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain. I hope you had a good Christmas. We're just getting our wings cleared as we've had a bit of snow overnight. And when that's finished, we're ready for takeoff for some warmer weather. I handpicked the airline's best cabin crew to take care of you today. We all hope you have a nice flight.
Finally, Scandinavian Airlines Flight 751 is cleared to proceed. There are build-ups of snow that the crew must avoid on the way to the runway.
Would have been nice of them to clear the snow.
Well, that would have made it too easy. Approaching holding point, runway 08.
Roger, Scandinavian 751. You are cleared for takeoff from runway 08.
Spoilers?
Armed.
Auto brake, takeoff and armed. Runway update performed. Checklist completed.
Set power.
Despite the winter conditions, the takeoff is routine.
V1, rotate.
Gear up.
Gear up selected.
When Wolfie reached out for the gear, I heard things which was different.
Just 25 seconds into the flight, as the plane is climbing, there is a problem.
When you hear things that are different from the normally, you get suspicious. There was a really big roar in the aircraft, almost like an explosion. Boom!
There was another banging noise that I just thought, what is that? I had never heard that before.
It's obvious the source of the noise is the right engine.
It sounds serious. I believe it's a compressor stall.
I took the right throttle and moved a little back, but there it really became strange because the engine performance increased when I reduced the throttle. It's like if you're sitting in your car and you're turning your wheel to the left and the car is driving to the right, you get confused.
We're not supposed to call into cockpit now. And then I thought, this is an emergency, I have to call the captain.
But Captain Rasmuson doesn't respond to the call. He's too busy trying to figure out what's going wrong with his plane.
I couldn't see anything on the instrument. They were quite stable and a quite normal range, no problem. But I could hear those roaring every second.
He searches for telltale signs of attack or structural failure.
And I looked up at the cabin pressure, because if you have a bomb or a freight door or anything which is ripped off, that'll give a decompression.
In the cabin, pressure levels are stable. But the crew has other concerns.
I saw the smoke and it smelled burnt.
What should we do about this?
Just 3,200 feet above the ground, the emergency escalates. The right engine quits.
When we have flown a little over 1 minute, the right engine just went down. I had a very, very short moment of thinking that I was in a nightmare and just dreaming. I was confused. I was really confused.
2 seconds later, the left engine also quits. The plane is now powerless.
One engine dropped and then another engine dropped. I thought that it wasn't true. It wasn't true. It wasn't real.
Less than a minute and a half after takeoff, the DC-9 begins falling from the sky.
And after that, it was complete silence. And I think that was the worst moment for me. Just being in the air, and it's so quiet. It was like a bird just sailing through the sky. So then I started to get scared.
Engine relay.
As the pilots try to restart their engines, things get even worse. The left engine erupts in flames.
And I saw the exhaust gas temperature was rising rapidly. The max temperature was around 680 degrees Celsius, and I saw it go above 800.
A fire in the engine could spread to the rest of the plane.
Should I pull?
If Sedermark pulls the fire extinguisher in the left engine, he will never be able to restart it. He pulls the handle to put out the fire. From his seat, Captain Per Holmberg can see that the crew is in trouble. Flight 751 is now falling at a rate of 1,200 feet per minute. But air traffic controllers at the Stockholm airport have no idea the plane is in trouble.
Arlanda, Stockholm, Scandinavian 751.
Good morning, SK 751. Climb to flight level 180. We have problems with our engines, please.
We need to go back to Arlanda.
751, roger. Turn right, heading to here.
Suddenly, the radio goes dead. A result of the failed engines. Only the right engine can provide power, but it's now spinning too slowly to generate electricity for the instruments.
Without the engine, you don't have any propulsion, so the only energy you have is your height.
With time running out, the pilots of Flight 751 must find a way to restart the right engine, or else crash into the countryside below. Scandinavian Airlines Flight 751 is now falling from the sky at 20 feet per second.
How can I help?
Captain Per Holmberg, who boarded the flight as a passenger, becomes part of the flight crew.
He came out in the cockpit and he said, "Is there anything I can help you with?" I don't think I even said yes. I just said, "Start the APU."
If the auxiliary power unit can be launched, it will bring back the radio and instruments.
So I just handed him the emergency checklist and started focus on controlling the flight to see that we were maintaining the speed and the attitude and that we were wings level. He managed to start the auxiliary power unit, so my flight instruments were supplied from that.
But for some reason, Captain Rasmussen's instruments don't come back online.
He managed to fly the plane basically by feel.
Power is also restored to the cabin, but it's small comfort to passengers who now know they're in extreme danger. Stockholm Air Traffic Control instructs the pilots to return to the airport.
Scandinavian 751, are you able to turn right, heading 090, radar vectoring for 0-1?
But the plane is now just 1,600 feet from the ground. And First Officer Sedermark's attempts to resuscitate it aren't working.
Roger, we are maintaining our heading, but we are trying to restart our engines.
Making a 180-degree turn back to Stockholm could be catastrophic.
I really had the feeling that if I turned the aircraft at that time, we would have stalled.
When you're turning back, you are losing a lot of energy. So the most safe thing to do is actually just to go straight, keep your wings level. That means that you will use less energy of your altitude, so you can maintain your speed.
You can maintain 2,000 feet.
We are not able to maintain 2,000 feet. We are descending. We are at 1,600 feet and descending.
Holmberg wants Rasmussen to focus his attention on finding a landing spot.
Look straight ahead. Look straight ahead.
He was screaming at Stefan, just look straight ahead and watch the flight path.
Prepare for on-ground emergency.
On-ground emergency!
Bend down! Bend down! Bend down!
So we shouted, "Bend down," I don't know how many times. Bend down, bend down, bend down.
Keep your seatbelts fastened.
While passengers brace, Rasmussen considers where to land his plane.
Look straight ahead.
And I had an idea that on the northern direction could bring us out to the Baltic Sea, which was at that time frozen. And that's an excellent runway.
But instead, he finds himself gliding powerlessly over a dense forest.
I saw that green area and I saw that little light spot in the middle of the forest, but that really looked short.
Steer right. Steer right.
Just 500 feet above the ground, Captain Rasmussen lifts the plane's nose to slow it down, hoping to soften the crash landing.
Pine trees from the top there look very soft. I could use the trees as almost like a pillow.
Should I lower the landing gear?
Yes, gear down.
Bend down and hold your knees.
I prepared myself for a hard impact. If it's an emergency landing, we have no engines, I just thought this is going to be a hard landing.
Stockholm, Scandinavian 751, we are crashing into the ground now.
I wasn't afraid until we were flying into the trees. Then I was scared, and I knew we were not going to make it.
I didn't thought I should die. I knew I should die. I made me pray to God. And then, a moment after, we were in a strange world.
After we have come to a complete stop, I feel the smell of airplane fuel. I thought, okay, we're gonna explode. And I look around and I see the snow because there was a big crack in the airplane fuselage just in front of the aft galley. And you could just walk down on the ground.
Everything was quiet, and I woke up. It might only have been a split second or so.
I was afraid that my spine was broken, that I wouldn't be able to walk again. So I remember I was sitting there and I was moving my toes and my feet just to see if I could have control over them. I had a pain in my hand because I had broken a bone in my hand, and I was bleeding heavily from my forehead, so I was trying to get clear of all the blood that was coming down in my eyes. And Stefan told me that we had to get out of the aircraft.
After plowing through 125 meters of pine forest, the pilot's fear is now that the broken aircraft could catch fire. Dozens of passengers escape through the breaks in the fuselage walls. But Captain Per Holmberg has been knocked unconscious by the crash.
It all went so fast that no one could take in what happened. So I tried to stay with the group of passengers I had there. But I just knew the feeling also that we had to wait a long time for the rescue teams.
Help will be here soon.
Fortunately, no fire materializes. But because they removed their winter clothing while boarding the sweltering plane, many passengers are starting to freeze.
Most people were just standing in their shirts, t-shirts, very, very little clothes. Few didn't even have shoes on.
They are now at risk from hypothermia.
So I focused on being caring. Maybe I did it for my own sake also. I needed a hug also. It was comforting to comfort someone else.
The wreckage of Scandinavian Airlines Flight 751 lies just 15 kilometers northeast of Stockholm Arlanda Airport. The fuselage has broken into 3 pieces. In the chaos of the moment, nobody knows how many people have been killed in the crash. Rescuers arrive within minutes and attend to the freezing survivors. They pull Captain Per Holmberg from the cabin, unconscious.
He landed on the wall at impact, and he skidded down on the wall to the floor at impact. So he was quite badly damaged. He cut his eyelid, and he also got his collarbone that was broken off, so his shoulder was in front of him.
92 of the passengers have sustained injuries. Only 8 are considered serious. But when the crew conducts a head count, they're stunned to learn that out of the 129 people who boarded Flight 751, not a single one was killed in the crash.
Everyone survived. It was like a shock just to take in. Wow, that was a fantastic comment.
This was the happiest captain in the world. We were all alive. It was a great moment.
Reporters break the remarkable story to the world. As the Swedish Accident Investigation Board, or SAIB, takes charge of the case. Scandinavian Airlines alerts its own investigators, dispatching Torre Hultgren to head up its team.
It's most unusual that the plane crashes in a wooded area and everybody survives. I've never heard of it before. The police kept everybody off the site itself. There was a cordon around the aircraft about 100 meters. We had a complete aircraft, nothing had burned, and we had lots of good data.
Henrik Ölander from the SAIB gets to work on the evidence.
And we all started to plan the documentation of the accident site, which means photographing all the fine little approach through the wood, you know, and to take photos of all the parts that were spread all over the place.
The 2 black boxes, which record cockpit conversations and store flight data, are recovered immediately. Investigators speak to survivors. Everyone tells a similar story.
Would you mind telling me what you saw and heard?
Loud, booming sounds from the engines moments after the flight began, smoke in the cabin, and finally the entire loss of power and an engine on fire.
You have a twin-engine aircraft, and you are really not supposed to lose both engines at the same time.
The Pratt & Whitney turbofan engines are sent to a Scandinavian Airlines repair shop for closer examination. Investigators are eager to speak with Captain Rasmuson about the incident. But to their dismay, Scandinavian Airlines takes him to the media first.
The first question, what did you think when both engines refused to function? It'll take me an awful long time to tell you all that.
The normal case is that the key witnesses, like the crew and so on, should be kept in quarantine until they meet the investigation board.
European media celebrate Captain Stefan Rasmussen as a hero for landing the DC-9 without engine power. But investigators consider the possibility that he or his co-pilot had made errors that caused the crisis in the first place.
The honor and the glory always rests with the captain, but so does also the mishaps.
I knew that being a person in the spotlight of the press would be a quite different situation. And I said to myself, the only thing you can do now is to give them all their story and then pray that they will find the reason.
Lars Lindberg is an investigative representative for the Swedish Airlines Pilot Association. He examines the wreckage for signs of mechanical or structural failure.
We knew both engines had failed for some reason. So we was concerned what was the background for something like that to happen. The first time I saw the engines in the workshop, I was surprised.
Is this all they found?
There was a number of parts that were completely missing, and this was something we hadn't seen before to this extent.
To find out what happened, investigators must find the missing pieces, which now lies somewhere in snow-covered fields and forests. A close study of Scandinavian Airlines Flight 751's engines reveals exactly which pieces are missing.
Parts of this aircraft was shedding parts from both engines. And then what you do is you go further in and you document everything and you try to find the root cause and see how it all comes together.
The missing pieces could hold the key to discovering why both of the plane's engines quit within seconds of each other. But they could be anywhere along the 15-kilometer route the aircraft covered during its short flight. They must be found. Investigators use the flight data recorder to map the plane's journey and determine where engine parts may have fallen. After scouring the snow-covered fields along the plane's path, the recovery team finds 500 fragments. Just a fraction of what's missing. Many are very badly damaged. Some of the titanium blades actually seem to have been on fire.
You had this titanium fire inside both engines, both the right and the left engine. And this titanium fire is a very unique occurrence. It's requiring very, very high pressure and very high temperature for a titanium blade to catch fire.
Investigators dig deeper into the cause of the engine trouble. The left engine's fuel line is badly dented. It was obviously hit by a fast-moving piece of metal inside the engine. The impact caused it to rupture.
This part got dislodged, it went out and hit the fuel line, and that fuel line cracked, sprayed fuel onto the hot engine.
The engine was clearly coming apart during the flight.
That sounds serious.
The discovery explains the fire in the left engine and why so many pieces of it were found so far from the crash site. But investigators are left wondering why the engines broke up in the first place. A major clue comes from passenger and crew testimonies, which told of repeated booming noises before the left engine caught fire. The cockpit voice recorder picked up these sounds.
So you can hear that, and we could correlate that with when the damage occurred. You can see that on the flight data recorder.
The sounds are familiar to investigators and leave no doubt. The DC-9's engines began surging shortly after takeoff. Jet engines rely on a steady stream of air for combustion. A series of fans move incoming air through various stages of compression. But when that flow is disrupted, fuel at the rear of the engines ignites violently and shoots forward.
That's a surge. You can have a small surge and you can have a large surge. And you can have the complete surge on the whole engine.
Sounds serious.
This surge process was very violent, so after a very short time, we had an aircraft with two engines that could not be restarted, that didn't generate any thrust. Basically, you had a giant glider at that point.
A closer look at the fan blades from the front of the engines explains why they were surging. They're badly dented. The damage would have prevented them from effectively directing air to the rear of the engines.
This damage that twisted the fan blade started this process. You got this disturbed air in the fan, you got this rotating fan stall that then triggered this whole breakdown, the compressor surge, and then the whole process that led up to the dual engine failures.
But what exactly mangled the blades? There are ways to tell.
If it comes from a stone, rubber, ice and so on. You can see it on the shape of the damage. The ice causes very specific damages. It's sort of like a soft dent.
Analysis of dent patterns on the fan blades is conclusive. They were struck by ice. Now investigators want to find out where the ice could have come from.
Weather data for the 24 hours leading up to the crash.
They know Stockholm had been hit with rain and snow in the hours before Flight 751 took off.
It was a situation with the temperature around 0 degrees. It was a drizzle, snow, rain in the morning.
They learned that the DC-9 arrived from Zurich the night before, with the fuel tanks more than half full.
They had quite a large amount of reserve fuel, of diversion fuel, in their wings. The fuel in the wing tanks were close to minus 20 degrees Celsius.
The conditions that night were ideal for the formation of clear ice on the wing surface.
And here you had very, very cold fuel on the top wing skin. And as the temperature dropped during the night, it went to snow and rain, and finally snow. So there was a layer cake. Ice at the bottom, slush, and snow on top. About 10 inches total on top of the wings in the morning.
Responsibility for de-icing the plane ultimately falls on the captain. Rasmuson insists he was aware of the overnight buildup. Investigators wonder if the pilot did all he could to ensure his plane was completely free of ice. Rasmussen claims he instructed technicians to de-ice the plane thoroughly.
I didn't walk around with the aircraft. It was cold, it was frosty.
Noticing that there was still frost on the wings, the head technician ordered a second round of de-icing.
I was really convinced that the aircraft was clean. And so was he,
Where are we now with the de-icing? The wings aren't quite done. They've done the underside.
The cockpit voice recorder backs up Rasmussen's testimony.
They've got it good and clean under the wings? Yes.
They de-iced the aircraft once and looked at it and I said, once more. And they de-iced us the second time.
In fact, a total of 850 liters of fluid was sprayed on the aircraft. But the fluid may have been faulty, not potent enough to melt the thick layer of ice that had accumulated on the wings overnight. Technicians test samples of the fluid used to de-ice Flight 751.
We found no discrepancies. There was nothing wrong with any of the fluids used.
But when investigators interview the maintenance crew that worked on the plane, they begin wondering if the de-icing team was thorough enough in their efforts. The ground crew insists that after they sprayed the wing, it appeared to be clean. But that appearance was deceptive.
It looked perfect because the clear ice on top of the fuel tanks, you cannot see the clear ice.
A technician inspected the front of the wing and found no ice. He couldn't have known that there was ice further back, out of his reach.
No provisions for stairs or anything that he could use to get up on the wing at the de-icing platform. So it looked shiny and nice, couldn't see any ice on it, but still there was maybe an inch of ice on top of the wing when the aircraft took off.
As soon as the plane took flight, the ice became a problem.
On this aircraft, the engines are positioned behind the wings, and as the aircraft rotated and the wings bent in order to take the weight of the aircraft, this ice in the wing roots loosened and it sucked right into the engine.
The ice damaged the fan blades at the front of the engines and ultimately caused them to begin surging.
Nobody really expected that this would happen, or could happen, but it did.
When ice breaks off the wings during flight, it doesn't pose a problem for most aircraft. But the placement of a DC-9's engines leaves them more susceptible to being struck. The Pratt & Whitney engines on Flight 751 were designed to withstand this type of ice ingestion. Something else must explain the disaster. Investigators know that the wrong reaction by a pilot can make surges worse. They comb through the flight data to see what these pilots did when the emergency struck.
The first thing you do when you have a surge, if you recognize it as a surge, is that you reduce power.
Captain Rasmuson claims he did just that.
Of course, you just pull the throttle back, and then you have the balance between the incoming fuel and incoming air. And that was actually what I did.
But the flight data recorder tells a different story.
Why is the engine power increasing?
It clearly shows that in the moments after the surge, thrust was reduced, but then seconds later was increased to beyond full power.
Yeah, it didn't add up because the RPM was increasing to 110%, and the throttle position was moving. It shouldn't be. The only thing that could move the throttles in clamp was the pilot's hand.
But if Rasmussen didn't push the throttles forward, something else did. It would explain the captain's confusion as his engines began to surge.
As a pilot, when you've gone through the training, you've done all your emergency training, you've been through the simulator, and now you have a system that is doing something that you don't expect, it's very confusing.
Despite their relentless efforts, investigators can find no possible explanation for the increase in thrust.
The frustrating part with the investigation was that we could not figure out why the system did what it did.
Then, almost 2 months after the accident, the plane's manufacturer provides the answer. The culprit is something called automatic thrust restoration.
It's brand new. It automatically increases the thrust during the climb.
Swedish authorities learned that automatic thrust restoration, or ATR, was recently introduced as a safety feature on Scandinavian Airlines planes. It existed because the FAA had discovered some pilots were throttling back considerably while taking off and landing to reduce noise over residential neighborhoods. The ATR was designed to make it impossible for them to throttle back to dangerous levels.
So as soon as he powered back, the system kicked in.
Investigators learned that when Rasmussen reduced power to clear his engine surge, the system read this as a dangerously low power setting and pushed the throttles forward. The increased thrust made the surging worse until the engines destroyed themselves. The investigation concludes that the pilots had taken the right steps to clear the surge and prevent the catastrophe. But the computer code which governs the ATR undermined their efforts.
A strip of zeros and ones caused the throttles to move and caused the engines that were stalling because they already got too much fuel, got even more fuel. And they went into self-destruct, both engines. In a few seconds, they were both totally destroyed.
The system was so new to Scandinavian Airlines that nobody there had even heard of it.
And it was confusing for everyone because we didn't know about the system, we didn't have information on the system. SAS didn't know the system existed on their aircraft.
We hadn't bought that modification. And it was sneaked in via another system.
Because he didn't know about the ATR, Rasmussen was unaware that he could only save his plane by switching it off. News that the automatic thrust restoration was responsible for the accident proved both a blessing and a curse for Captain Rasmussen. It eliminated any notion that he had made a mistake.
When I got that message, I was really released. It was like winning in the lottery. It was, because I was so happy. Because then I could explain why I was in that total cone of confusion.
But the fallout would ultimately destroy a love affair and end a career. On October the 20th, 1993, the Swedish Accident Investigation Board releases its report on the crash of Flight 751. It determines that the actions of Captain Rasmussen and First Officer Cedermark contributed to the safe outcome of this incident. And although investigators question Captain Per Holmberg's decision to enter the cockpit in the first place, they do praise his contribution.
This crew flew until they stood still on the ground. They never gave up. They never gave up. They didn't give an inch.
The investigators put much of the blame for the accident on Scandinavian Airlines because their procedures for checking for clear ice were inadequate.
I believe it's a compressor stall.
The report also condemns the fact that the pilots didn't know about the automatic thrust restoration and how it would act in a surge situation.
If the ATR system hadn't been there, if the trolleys hadn't moved forward, there wouldn't have been an accident.
It was a bit strange that we didn't have all the documentation available to us, so we knew what we could expect if something like this would happen.
In the wake of the crash, Scandinavian Airlines started training its pilots how to use the ATR system. They also implemented steps to ensure airplanes don't take off with clear ice on the wings.
We changed all the procedures, we provided stairs for the mechanic, and we made it a requirement to go up on top of the wing and touch it with your hand to verify after de-icing.
After healing from his injuries, First Officer Ulf Cedermark returned to the cockpit.
I didn't feel the responsibility that I wouldn't be able to do my job again. Whatever happens, I know that I still can see things for what they are. And I still love doing my job, and if something bad happens, I can deal with it.
But Stefan Rasmussen's return proved far more difficult.
Set power.
After I'd heard from a high-skilled psychologist, we talked about getting in the air again. He knew that would be a hard decision to take.
Gear up. Fire drill.
After time in the simulator, Rasmussen couldn't regain confidence in his plane.
Sorry, guys.
In a disaster situation, in a crisis, is that you have optimized the teamwork between man and machine. I really felt that I didn't trust the aircraft.
Pilots tends to take the responsibility for all that went wrong. Too much of the glory and also too much of the responsibility.
With the right counseling, about 90% of pilots involved in an accident are able to continue flying. Even though Captain Rasmussen received treatment, his career ended with the crash of Flight 751.
Taking that decision to leave aviation as pilot was like having your highest love and come to that conclusion that you have to kill her. I had many hours, many missions of happiness in an aircraft. And I loved my passengers, I loved my aircraft so much, so I said, that's it. I never regretted, never. And I think I was right.
beginning our descent towards Amsterdam Schiphol Airport.
Turn that off, Vanessa. Thank you.
Turkish Airlines Flight 1951 is preparing to land in Amsterdam.
Amsterdam, Turkish 1951, descending to 7,000, speed 250.
The crew is flying a state-of-the-art Boeing 737.
Flaps 15.
Localizer alive, localizer capture.
In the final moments of the flight, the landing turns into a catastrophe. The plane falls like a rock. The crash of Turkish Airlines Flight 1951 involves the most popular plane on Earth. With nearly 1.5 million passengers boarding 737s every day, investigators need to figure out if the problem was with the plane or with the pilots flying it.
Mayday, Mayday.
On the morning of February the 25th, 2009, Turkish Airlines Flight 1951 becomes the first plane to crash at Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport in more than 10 years.
It smashed into the ground really hard. It made a tremendous noise.
The plane hits the ground in a muddy field just north of runway 18 right. Since the crash was so close to the airport, rescue workers arrive quickly. Most of the passengers have survived, but many are badly injured. Survivors are taken straight to local hospitals. Images of the Amsterdam accident quickly spread around the world. This is the third crash of a passenger jet in the past 6 weeks. The sudden nature of this accident adds to the mystery. It doesn't take long for the Dutch safety board to arrive at the scene. They will be investigating this accident, but they won't be alone. The crash involved an American-made plane, so the US National Transportation Safety Board sends Joe Sador, one of its most experienced investigators, to Amsterdam.
When it's a non-US registered aircraft that crashes overseas, such as this Turkish Airlines, we are the state of manufacture and design of the airframe, and also in this case the engines.
Fuselage in 3 large pieces, engines forward of the main wreck site.
Flight 1951 was one of the most advanced aircraft in the skies, the Boeing 737-800 series. It's designed to travel longer routes at higher altitudes.
The new generation 737 is still the best airplane Boeing ever built. We developed an airplane that had an improved wing, improved avionics, simpler systems that required less maintenance.
Investigators know this isn't just any plane. The 737 is the world's best-selling commercial jet. Finding out why this one crashed is imperative. There are more than 5,000 of them in the skies. They carry about 1.5 million passengers a day. Investigators must quickly determine if there's a flaw with the plane that could cause another accident. What they know so far is that Flight 1951 had been traveling from Istanbul, Turkey, to Amsterdam. There were 128 passengers on board the early morning flight, including 4 engineers from Boeing.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent towards Amsterdam Schiphol Airport. Please raise your seat backs to the upright position and stow away your tray tables.
There was no mention on board of any kind of trouble in the cockpit. The crash has killed 9 people, including 3 members of the Boeing team and the pilots in the cockpit.
See if you can get me some aerials of the crash site.
There are eerie similarities to another recent accident involving a Boeing aircraft. British Airways Flight 38.
Approximately a year before this, there had been a 777 short landing at Heathrow, which had a dual-engine flame out.
In that accident, a Boeing 777 fell to the ground short of the runway. The British Airways pilots reported that both their engines stopped delivering power just before landing. At the time of the Turkish Airways crash, the cause of that accident hasn't been found. Like in that case, investigators have plenty of clues to work with. The plane and its engines are largely intact. The flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder are found in good condition. There are also plenty of survivors to describe what happened. According to the passengers, the landing had been routine, but then suddenly the plane simply dropped out of the sky and hit the ground. But perhaps the biggest clue comes from the crash site itself. The wreckage is not spread out. It tells investigators that the plane could not have been traveling forward at high speed when it hit the ground.
The way the aircraft had crashed, it did appear to be some sort of a landing accident in which there was moderate control of some sort.
The pattern of debris and the passenger reports point investigators to an immediate suspect: the engines.
The engines issue was a very big issue in my thought process at the time, initially.
There's no evidence of fire on the fuselage. In many crashes, fuel in the plane's tanks ignites on impact. The lack of fire raises an obvious question. Did the engines stop running because Flight 1951 had simply run out of gas?
That was one of the first thoughts that I had was, did this airplane have fuel aboard? Because otherwise, how does a 737 literally fall out of the sky on approach to an airport?
But the location and condition of the plane's engines suggest that perhaps they didn't quit in flight.
Sure looks like it was running.
When we first looked at where the engines ended up, the initial impression was that they probably were producing thrust at impact, given that they were so far forward of the main wreckage. That was just a very general conclusion.
Only the flight data recorder can tell investigators how much power the engines were generating in the seconds before the crash.
Lots of fuel. Rules that out.
It doesn't take long to discover that there was plenty of fuel in the plane's tanks. Flight 1951 definitely did not run out of gas. Passengers report that in the final seconds before the crash, the plane hit what felt like turbulence. It points investigators to a well-known culprit, a microburst. A microburst is a powerful column of air that shoots out of storm clouds. It can literally slam a low-flying plane to the ground.
If an airplane flies into that at approach speeds, you're not going to be flying anymore. You're going to come out of the sky. Certainly, it was one of the things that all of us took a look at the beginning. Was there a microburst?
In 1985, a Delta Airlines flight was caught in a microburst while landing at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. The plane hit the ground short of the runway. 137 people were killed. Investigators learned that there were heavy clouds above the airport at the time of the accident. A powerful gust of wind may well have accompanied them. The flight data recorder will have recorded wind speeds outside the plane. Investigators will need to analyze the flight data to prove the microburst theory. In the meantime, the rescue has led to an unusual discovery.
There was 3 pilots in the cockpit, which is unusual. This is a 2-crew cockpit. So why was that 3rd pilot there?
Since none of the 3 pilots survived the accident, it's all the more urgent for investigators to retrieve the data from the cockpit voice recorder. It records conversations in the cockpit. They're in luck.
Because of the way that the aircraft crashed, access to the recorders and the condition of the recorders was excellent.
The reason for the 3rd pilot is soon uncovered.
Flying standard arrival route, visibility 3,500 meters, expected to decrease to 2,500 meters.
For First Officer Murat Sezer, this had been a training flight of sorts. He was new to the airline and was being shown the intricacies of landing at Amsterdam's airport.
In the Jepson charts, which is what all pilots use to navigate to and from Schiphol, there's 102 pages of information on Schiphol alone. So there's dozens of approaches.
Runway 18 right has 3 high-speed exits to the left.
The captain, Hassan Arisan, was doing double duty. He was training his first officer.
Make small corrections as we get close to the runway.
And was in command of Flight 1951. It's because Captain Arisan was teaching that there was the third pilot in the cockpit. Olgay Ozgur was a safety pilot. He was there to keep an eye on the flight's progress during this training mission.
The purpose of that second set of eyes is to make sure that the captain and the first officer, if they're in a situation where it's a little bit of a training portion of the flight, that they don't miss something.
We got a clean recording?
The voice recorder reveals that the 3 crew members began preparations for landing when still above 8,500 feet.
Amsterdam, Turkish 1951, descending to 7,000, speed 250.
But the voice recorder has picked up an unusual sound, a warning that makes no sense at this stage of the flight.
One of the investigators from Boeing was a engineering pilot that came and helped with the CVR. And he's listening to see when, or are there any unusual sounds that can be heard that would not be normal.
Speed okay for ILS 18 right. Descend to 4,000, ILS 18 right.
The alarm keeps sounding. It's the landing gear configuration warning horn. Captain Arisan continually dismisses it.
Turkish 1951, descend to 4,000, ILS 18 right. Landing gear.
Is that the landing gear warning? They're at 8,300 feet here.
The warning is a solid clue, but investigators can't yet see how it could possibly have caused a crash. The crew of Turkish Airlines Flight 1951 got warnings to extend their landing gear while still thousands of feet in the air.
On the initial listen, we heard a gear warning horn occur as the aircraft was approaching, when it was still up and it was coming in about 10,000 feet and below.
Investigators now turn to the flight data recorder to help solve some of the mystery surrounding this flight. The analysis of wind speeds outside the aircraft is completed. It's clear none are drastic enough to have brought down the plane.
Evidence of a microburst.
But the flight data recorder does provide some valuable insight into the cause of the landing gear warning. One of the instruments that measures altitude had the plane already on the ground.
When we looked and saw the radio altimeter data, on the recorder it showed about 8,000 feet, and then immediately it went down to about -8. -8 feet is an indication that the aircraft's on the ground, but of course it's still at 2,000 feet.
The Boeing 737 is equipped with 2 separate altimeters. One measures air pressure to determine the plane's height above sea level. That reading is displayed prominently in the cockpit on both pilots' flight display.
10, set, sir.
The plane is also equipped with a radio altimeter. It's made up of 4 antennas. 2 transmit signals to the ground, and 2 others read the signal that bounces back to determine the plane's height.
It's precise. It's very, very precise. Pressure altimeters can sometimes be not as accurate, and radar altimeters are 100% accurate if they're working properly.
One antenna feeds the reading to the first officer's display. The other feeds the captain's instruments. In the case of Flight 1951, the captain's side was wrong most of the flight. Investigators go back over the CVR and make a puzzling discovery.
Amsterdam, Turkish 1951, descending to 7,000, speed 250. Radio altimeter.
Captain Arisan seems to have known that the landing gear warning was being caused by a faulty radio altimeter.
The airplane thought that it was low to the ground and the gear was not down. And the captain recognized that the problem was really in the radio altimeter, showing him that they should be on the ground, and he goes, "It's just the radio altimeter."
Throughout much of the approach, the captain's radio altimeter had been displaying a reading of -8 feet, triggering the warning to lower the gear.
They treated it like it was a nuisance.
Turkish 1951.
Descend to 2000.
2000, 1951.
Investigators dig for any other abnormalities. They learned that with Flight 1951 still about 17 kilometers from the airport, controllers directed the pilots to begin their final turn to line up with the runway.
Turkish 1951. Left heading
210. Cleared approach.
18 right.
Left 210, clear ILS, Turkish 1951.
210 set, sir.
This turn puts Flight 1951 in line with runway 18 right. It's equipped with an instrument landing system, which sends out a signal outlining the ideal descent path to the foot of the runway. The autopilot follows that glide path until the plane is a few hundred feet from the ground. Then the pilot takes over. It makes landing almost effortless.
The ILS is pretty easy to follow. It's a video game. My daughter has flown in a simulator and can land a 737 using the ILS.
The crew begins configuring their plane for landing, unfazed by the warning horn that's repeatedly triggered by the malfunctioning radio altimeter.
Flaps 15.
10 kilometers out, Flight 1951 picks up the ILS signal that will guide the plane to the runway.
Localizer alive. Localizer capture.
The safety pilot, Olgay Ojgur, now reminds Captain Arasan about the failed altimeter.
We have radio altimeter failure, sir.
Okay.
Turkish 1951.
Runway 18 right. Clear to land.
Clear to land, thank you.
Investigators are stumped. The crew knew about the malfunction and continued their approach. How had it then caused them to crash? Clearly, there was more to this accident than a faulty altimeter.
The whole premise of airline safety, the way we build the airplanes, the way we fly them, is based on the idea that we can have any number of failures and we should still be able to arrive safely. The radio altimeter is just one instrument. There's no way in the world that that one instrument, if it fails, should be a major cause of worry that we're going to have a crash.
Investigators wonder if the crew had been given proper guidance for their approach. They turn to exchanges between the pilots and the controller who guided them in. They carefully review every instruction.
Turkish 1951, descend to 4000. Speed okay for ILS 18 right. Turkish 1951, descend to 2000. Turkish 1951, left heading 210, cleared approach 18 right.
By following the controller's instructions, the crew made their final turn much too close to the runway.
So to intercept properly, they should be here.
International guidelines call for approaching planes to intercept the signal that guides them to the runway from below. It's so pilots don't have to make any drastic last-minute course corrections to get to it.
To intercept here, they had to descend.
But Flight 1951 was given instructions that brought it to the threshold of the glide slope while still way above it. It's a common practice at Schiphol because it gets planes to the runway faster.
Because they were so close, they had to capture the glide slope from above. Although it is an unusual situation, it is one that can be handled by a flight crew if it is managed properly.
Approaching a glide slope from above is more difficult, mostly because the crew has to suddenly slow the plane and descend rapidly to intercept the signal.
We also call this a slam dunk approach, and some pilots like it, some pilots don't. It's a little bit harder, and things happen quicker when you're above the glide path trying to intercept from above, and it's just a challenge for a lot of pilots.
The approach from above increased the crew's workload, but it's standard practice at Schiphol Airport.
I've flown into Schiphol dozens of times, and I expect it.
If the controller's instructions had somehow overtaxed this crew, their conversations would indicate it. They're just 5 kilometers from the runway.
1,000.
Check.
Flaps 40. Speed brake.
Speed brake armed. Green light.
One thing at a time. Landing gear.
Gear down. 3 green.
Flaps.
Flaps 40. Green light.
500.
All lights on.
Please warn the cabin crew.
Cabin crew, take your seats.
Then, real trouble. A stall warning.
Speed, sir.
I have control.
100 knots of speed.
Arisan fought to save his plane, but just 400 feet above the ground and only 1.5 kilometers from the runway, the Boeing 737 suddenly fell straight down. It only took a few seconds for it to hit the ground.
Turkish 1951.
The recording sheds light on the final minutes of the flight. The crew was configuring their plane for landing well after it should have been done.
Flaps.
Flaps 40. Green light.
Most airlines have regulations that call for a flight to be stabilized, to have all checklists completed by the time the plane hits 1,000 feet.
In instrument conditions, you're required 1,000 feet to have basically everything done. The airplane is configured, you have slowed, you have run your before landing check, and you have received your landing clearance. And from 1,000 feet on in, you just monitor the instruments, and we're looking for the runway.
Please warn the cabin crew.
Cabin crew.
In fact, this crew was still running their checklist up to the moment the crisis hit, 460 feet above the ground.
This approach was not stabilized.
Because the aircraft was unstable, the flight crew was in a very high workload environment in the last 1,000 feet of flight.
The radio altimeter was malfunctioning. The aircraft was giving off warnings. The crew was assigned a challenging approach, and they were executing a checklist late. But none of this explains why Flight 1951 crashed.
In these type of accidents, you can never get inside the head of the pilots. And that's a very frustrating type of accident.
But the flight data recorder does provide another intriguing clue. Moments before Flight 1951 hit the ground, the plane's engines were at idle, hardly providing any power. Perhaps this accident is a repeat of the Heathrow incident.
The engines, it was interesting to note, were at idle approximately the last 2 minutes of flight, until the very end when the thrust was increased again. That was a big red flag right there. The question is why was that the case?
But then they spot something that's very different from the accident at Heathrow.
Tart flare mode.
For some reason, while still more than 1,000 feet above the ground, the plane's computer began preparing to touch down. In retard flare mode, engine power is reduced to idle by the flight computer, and the plane's nose automatically pitches up to the flare position. Planes should only be in this configuration just before they touch the ground.
The autopilot raises the nose to break the descent. The auto throttles brings the power back to flight idle, and you touch down with the power either all the way in idle or just about to be in idle.
But Flight 1951 went into a slow, nose-up position well before touchdown, causing the plane to fly slower and slower throughout its descent. So why was Flight 1951 in landing mode? And why hadn't any of the 3 crew members noticed how slowly they were flying?
So, what else was going on when the engines went to idle?
The trouble seems to start with the malfunctioning altimeter.
We had to look at the system as a whole and to see how that -8 affected the other systems on the aircraft. And that was a very big portion of this investigation. We had to say, how did the autopilot use that data? More importantly, how did the auto throttle use that data?
The computer that flies the plane consists of two main systems, the autopilot and the auto throttle. The auto throttle determines how much power to ask the engines for, while the autopilot controls the plane's altitude and direction. The two systems work independently of each other, and only one of the radio altimeters provides information to the auto throttle.
In this case, I had to learn everything there was about radio altimeters and auto throttle systems, which I didn't know before.
The pieces of the puzzle begin coming together when they find the connection between the faulty radio altimeter and engine power.
The radio altimeter provides information to the auto throttle from the captain's side.
The only altimeter feeding information to the auto throttle was the captain's, and it was wrong. It showed -8 feet throughout most of Flight 1951's approach. It's beginning to look like the faulty radio altimeter triggered the events that led to the crash. Investigators need to know what went wrong with it. On a 737, the transmitting and receiving antennas for both radio altimeters are lined up underneath the cockpit. 3 of the antennas were all but destroyed in the crash. They can't be tested. But one antenna from the captain's side is undamaged. Investigators consider 2 possibilities: a failure of one of the components, or some sort of interference that caused the faulty reading. The only component that survived the crash checks out. The computers that control the system also work. But investigators do make a curious discovery about them. They aren't the same ones that were installed on the plane when it was delivered to Turkish Airlines 7 years ago. This find changes the focus of the investigation.
The maintenance aspect of this accident aircraft was one that we looked at as deeply as we could.
When the plane's maintenance log is studied, investigators find that the radio altimeter on this plane had a problematic history.
We got additional data from Turkish Airlines, and that data showed that on this one aircraft, of the past, I believe, over 1,000 flights, there was about 150 flights that had faulty radio altimeter systems.
The documents show that a little more than a year before the crash, both computers were replaced because of complaints they were causing faulty readings. One of the incidents involved a radio altimeter reading of -8 feet.
So that was telling us that there was an issue that had been there. The issue did not just occur on this flight.
The faulty readings persisted. Mechanics repeatedly swapped the computers and replaced the antennas to try to solve the problem. It's determined that Turkish Airlines tried several ways to fix the altimeter, but they couldn't find a repair that worked. At the time of the accident, Turkish Airlines had a fleet of 52 Boeing 737-800 series airplanes.
It's on page 93.
When we reviewed the maintenance data, we found that radio altimeter problems had been written up several times on both the accident airplane and the fleet.
Investigators discover that in the year before the crash, Turkish Airlines dealt with 235 system faults with the radio altimeters on their 737s. Fixes ranged from replacing and exchanging antennas, cleaning of the systems, exchanging and replacing the computers, and installing gaskets to shield the system from possible water damage.
It's not like they weren't doing anything about it.
The Turkish Airlines maintenance personnel knew that the radio altimeter problem was one of their highest issues with regard to maintenance.
16 of those altimeter repairs were made to the plane that crashed in February 2009. If the problem was so widespread, Investigators wonder why it hadn't caused serious problems before this accident. They don't have to dig too far back to find out that in fact it had, on this very same plane.
On 2 recent flights, they had the exact same problem.
Twice in the 48 hours leading up to the accident, the radio altimeter showed a negative reading, putting the plane into retard flare mode. Both times the crew noticed the problem, disengaged the auto throttles, and brought the plane in for a safe landing.
You just disconnect it and fly the airplane.
In the months after the crash, other operators come forward with similar stories. In Australia, in the Netherlands, in Canada, in Austria, pilots report their 737s going into retard flare mode when the left radio altimeter showed a faulty reading. Each of those crews reacted the same way. They disengaged the auto throttle and pushed the power back up manually. They all landed safely.
Things are going to break on an airplane, and usually you're able to identify that and take that out of, make it so that it's not a threat for the landing.
In 2008, Boeing received a whopping 2,569 reports of faulty radio altimeters on their latest 737s. But very few of those cases involved the plane going into retard flare mode.
Hardly any reports at all.
Boeing also tried but couldn't find the cause of the failures. They concluded that the radio altimeter problem was not a threat to safety because the 737 gives off enough warnings so that crews can intervene and land safely. In fact, in every instance where the radio altimeter failed, crews were able to recover. Turkish Airlines Flight 1951 seems to be the one exception. Investigators still don't know why.
It really got us wondering of what happened. And that's when we started to look really closely at the actions of the flight crews while it was on that final approach in less than 1,000 feet.
Finally, as investigators again revisit the last minutes of Flight 1951, the circumstances of the tragedy become clear. They see a remarkable sequence of events that transpire to bring down this plane.
So, what was happening when the plane went into retard flare mode?
They discover that the plane went into landing mode and pulled back power at the worst possible moment, exactly as the crew was descending to meet the glide slope.
It masked what was actually happening.
As the crew configured their plane to drop down to meet the glide slope, they expected the plane to slow down as part of that maneuver. But the plane was actually slowing down because the computer was in landing mode. That's why none of the 3 pilots said anything about the throttles moving to idle.
It was insidious. Where it first captured in the retard mode, it didn't hurt them at all because they were actually high and they were a little bit fast. And the pilots actually wanted the power back anyway. In fact, the throttles may have already been in the flight idle mode as they were trying to get down and slow down.
Right, the trouble starts here at 8,300 feet, 13 miles out from the airport, minutes before the crash.
Amsterdam. Turkish 1951, descending 7,000, speed 250.
Turkish 1951, descend to 4,000. Speed okay for ILS 1 feet. Right.
Radio altimeter.
Would the crew have known that because of that radio altimeter they would have gone to a retard flare mode in the throttles? No.
It was a common problem at the airline, but the crew couldn't see the risk it posed this flight.
We have an airplane that was malfunctioning in a very minor way, but in a way that, if not caught, could and did metastasize into something much more virulent.
Turkish 1951, descend to 2,000.
2,000, 1951.
Turkish 1951, left heading 10, cleared approach. 18 right.
Left 210, cleared ILS, Turkish 1951.
Now left at 210 degrees, maintaining 2,000 feet, brings the flight in right here, 5.5 miles out. They now have to intercept the glide slope from above.
At 2,000 feet, with the glide slope below them, the pilots have to reduce their speed while descending steeply.
Speed 140.
They believe the throttles are moving back for the descent to the glide slope. In fact, the auto throttle is slowing the plane down because it's gone into landing mode. It will continue to slow the plane until it stalls.
What we found is that when the flight crew was doing their before landing checklist, each one of them was doing something while they should have been monitoring their airspeed.
For the next 100 seconds, no one notices what's happening. Until it's too late.
Established altitude set.
1,000.
Check.
Flaps 14.
Speed set.
The experienced pilot recognized that the first officer was probably a little bit behind on the approach, so he calls for flaps 40 and moves the lever, informing the first officer that he has done so. He's trying to help the first officer catch up to the position of the aircraft.
Speed brake.
Speed brake armed. Green light.
One thing at a time. Landing gear.
The plane is now 700 feet from the ground.
Gear down. 3 green.
Flaps.
Flaps 40. Green light.
In their haste to complete their checklist, none of the 3 crew members noticed the warnings that their speed is dropping dangerously. First, a red bar appeared on their flight display. Then, when the airspeed continued to drop, a flashing box appeared around their actual airspeed to draw the pilot's attention to it. At this point, no one sees either.
Cabin report confirmed.
The aircraft is now 600 feet from landing.
When things start changing colors, it's a warning to you, it's a caution to you that you're approaching the limits of the aircraft.
Missed approach. Altitude set.
500.
So all of these indications the crew has in front of them saying that the aircraft is slowing down. During that time, they were still completing their checklist.
Of course, the aircraft is getting closer to the ground.
In fact, it's less than 500 feet from touchdown.
And right before the stick shaker started, the captain told the safety pilot,
"Please warn the cabin crew."
Cabin crew, take your seats. Speed, sir.
I have control.
By the time they advanced the throttles to full power, it was unrecoverable. They were too low for the engines to catch up.
And that's it. It's now too late to save this plane. They all knew about the altimeter problem, but knowing didn't help.
Boeing also didn't foresee the potentially deadly effect of a faulty altimeter. But on February the 25th, 2009, it triggered an unusual sequence of events that brought down a jetliner and killed 9 people. The official report into the accident blames it on a convergence of circumstances.
There is never, ever just one cause to an airline accident. It simply doesn't exist. Maybe someday God will swap one out of the sky, but until then, there's never one cause.
The Dutch report also points out that Boeing could have realized the problem with the radio altimeter system could have had an impact on safety. Given that no one foresaw how that failure might cause a crash, the Turkish Airlines accident raises a big question. Are airplanes becoming too complex? Investigators have determined that Turkish Airlines Flight 1951 crashed mainly because the pilots didn't recognize the consequences of the warnings they were getting.
Turkish 1951, descend to 4,000.
This is not the first plane to crash because the crew didn't understand what their plane was telling them.
Our problem is not the automation. Our problem is the depth of the training and the ability of the human beings to recover from mistakes made in interfacing with the automation.
Mika Ensley studies the relationship between pilots and technology.
We haven't really designed the automation to take best advantage of what people do well and take away the parts that people don't do well.
In 1996, the crew of an Aero Peru 757 crashed when the pilots couldn't decipher contradictory warnings about their altitude and airspeed. The plane flew into the Pacific Ocean. 61 passengers and 9 crew members were killed. In 1995, the flight management system on a Boeing 757 could and should have steered the plane to a safe landing in Cali, Colombia. But a last-minute change to the flight plan meant the crew had to reprogram their computer. They mistakenly entered a course that took them headlong into a 9,000-foot mountain. 159 people died in the crash.
The cautionary tale here is that we can get this equipment, we can get these silicon-based units, if you will, so sophisticated that we can't talk to them effectively. And when they go berserk, or they have a problem, or we misprogram them, we end up putting ourselves and our passengers in danger while we're trying to figure it out.
NASA is working on something called the Integrated Intelligent Flight Deck. It's a project aimed at helping humans better use the technology that surrounds them in the cockpit.
They're looking at automated flight manual systems, voice recognition systems. They've developed new kinds of microphones that are bone-conducting chips. They're developing new displays for understanding the ground environment, for being able to detect where other aircraft are in the environment.
What some researchers are finding is that the best technology shouldn't replace pilots, but work with them.
Really integrating people with technology more effectively has to do with designing the displays so that you can really understand what it's doing, and you can make it simpler to understand how to make it do what it is you want it to do. You shouldn't have to push 16 buttons through 8 levels of menus to figure out what's going on with the system. It should be integrated and presented effectively. It should be as easy to communicate with as the person next to you.
Boeing and Airbus, the 2 largest manufacturers of passenger planes, take very different approaches to the relationship between humans and technology. Airbus gives the flight computer much of the decision-making power in the cockpit.
In their view, this is a way to prevent a lot of human errors by making sure the airplane doesn't do something that's going to cause a crash, even if the humans want it to.
But Boeing has a different view. Its philosophy is to provide information to pilots and have them make decisions.
Having more information is better for the pilot than having the pilot in the loop, in the equation, so to speak. I kind of like that.
Airbus will argue vociferously and in continuous fashion that view is archaic and incorrect. I think the jury is still out.
The final report into the Turkish Airlines tragedy blames the crash of Flight 1951 partly on a failure of technology.
The erroneous radio altimeter data caused the autothrottle to go to an improper mode that is, of course, not a good situation.
The cause of the radio altimeter failure was never uncovered. The Dutch investigation asks Boeing to improve the reliability of the system.
We learned a lot about the radio altimeter system and how it affects the autothrottle system. Boeing is currently working on system improvements to prevent this type of autothrottle event from occurring again.
But the report also faults the crew for not noticing that their airspeed was dropping dangerously low, in spite of the fact that there were 3 pilots on board.
Forget that you got an autothrottle. You look at the airspeed, and you look at the altitude. You look out the damn window if you want to, but airspeed is a crucial component of staying alive in an airplane. And you always need to know what your airspeed is.
But to Mika Ensley, the crew's failure to monitor instruments is entirely understandable and may be more the fault of the instruments than the crew.
It's actually very difficult for people to be monitors of automation. One of the things that people don't do a good job of actually is monitoring. We're very good on-the-spot decision makers. We're very good at coming up with creative solutions to problems, but repetitive monitoring is the kind of thing that actually people aren't very good at all. So what we have to do is design automation to work with people in a way that keeps them more actively, cognitively involved and in the loop, and not just monitoring a piece of automation to say, is it doing what it's supposed to be doing?
Who's the ultimate computer? The pilot, the individual who should be able to say, I don't know what this thing is doing to me, but I'm punching it off and flying the airplane. Fly the jet. Probably the smartest thing we ever learned to say in our training in the airlines, fly the jet. Do that first or nothing else counts. That's what they forgot to do.